Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. Happy Friday, it's July 18th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. In California's fight against wildfires, one tool has gotten more scrutiny than others.
The two sides of it are very much, it's either purely good and we should be using more of it, then other people said that it's purely awful and we should not be using it at all.
We will take a look at the criticism of a popular fire suppressant right after these news headlines. The Trump administration has announced that it will move forward with plans to claw back $4 billion in funding for California's high-speed rail. The administration cited significant delays and cost overruns on the project. Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom quickly defended the bullet train on social media. He doubled down on the state's plan to complete a section of the track from Bakersfield to Merced. California voters first approved about $10 billion to build the rail from L.A. to San Francisco in 2008. Public defenders are lobbying against a bill in the state legislature. The measure would increase penalties for swatting. That's when someone falsely reports an emergency with the intent of having a SWAT team dispatched to a specific location. Margot George is with the California Public Defenders Association.
We appreciate the harm and strain that swatting causes for both victims and law enforcement. Unfortunately, it will still be directed primarily at people who are mentally ill.
Marietta Republican Senator Kelly Sayardo voted in support of the measure.
The concerns about mental illness playing the main factor in this can be dealt with through the court system as people are determined whether they are mentally capable of answering for their crime. We have a process for that.
The bill has passed the Senate Public Safety Committee and heads next to appropriations. Hundreds of workers are fighting for better wages and benefits from one of the nation's top-rated casinos located in Madera County. Adam Sanchez has worked at Chukchansi Gold Resort and Casino for 20 years as a slot attendant and line cook.
You know, the work we do, we've made the casino number one for 17 years. We make them lots of money. You know, we feel like we just need a little bit more of a livable wage.
Workers are currently in negotiations with casino leaders and hope to reach a resolution in the coming weeks. They ended a days-long strike on Monday night. One of the workers' biggest demands is better benefits for employees who aren't members of the Picayune Rancheria tribe. California's primary election is almost a year away, and both political parties are already pumping millions of dollars into some of the valley's most competitive districts. House District 22, held by Hanford Republican David Valadao, is at the top of the list. A super PAC called Activate America announced on Thursday a $50 million funding blitz to boost Democratic candidates running for these seats. The money will pay for field offices and canvassers to reach voters where they are. Valadao has overcome a strong voter registration advantage for Democrats to win the seat several times over the past decade. And elections for Fresno County's top law enforcement officials will take place in 2028. An appeals court judge ruled this week the county must comply with a state law that aligns elections for sheriffs and district attorneys with the presidential cycle. The law passed in 2022, but was challenged by Fresno County. Sheriff John Zanoni and District Attorney Lisa Smitkamp would have been up for re-election next year. Zanoni took the ruling in stride, telling our news partner Fresno Land, quote, "It's time to move on."
If you start your day with Central Valley Daily and are looking for a companion program in the afternoon, there's All Things Considered. Hi, I'm Sarith Hawk. Each weekday afternoon, I'm on KVPR's broadcast, bringing you the day's local and national news. Join me for All Things Considered, weekdays from 3:30 to 6 on KVPR. You can also stream us online at kvpr.org, through your smart speaker, and on the KVPR app.
And now to our main story. If you have ever seen images of fire crews trying to put out a wildfire, there's a good chance that you've seen a red substance being dropped over the fire. That substance is a retardant, and it helps keep a fire from growing. But what exactly is in it? That is a question some environmentalists also want to know. While the retardant is widely used, the actual ingredients are proprietary. The main company that makes the retardant, called Miceck, is Perimeter Solutions. Critics fear their retardant may be causing damage to the environment, wildlife, and even people who are exposed. But the company stands by its product, saying it actually helps mitigate negative environmental impacts from fires. Environmentalists have filed several lawsuits against the U.S. Forest Service for its use of the product. It's worth noting that water is still the chief tool when it comes to fighting fires, but Miceck is also heavily used. For instance, in 2021, nearly 18 million gallons of the substance were airdropped, according to Greg Miceck. He's a reporter at our California newsroom partner CapRadio in Sacramento, who's reported on Miceck's use and subsequent scrutiny. Greg joined us to explain a little more about this controversial fire retardant.
We know most of what's in Miceck. Most of it is ammonium phosphate, which is basically just fertilizer. And then the red color actually comes from iron oxide, which is rust. So about 75 to 85% of it is just fertilizer and rust. And then there's additional what are listed as performance additives. And a lot of times those are to help with reducing corrosion. And those, for the most part, are unknown, at least officially.
Okay. Unofficially, do we have an idea of what those ingredients are?
Yeah, so USC did a study recently to try to see exactly, what were those performance additives. And they found a lot of heavy metals in there. So stuff like cadmium, chromium, vanadium, a lot of other kind of things like that. And those were found in pretty high concentrations. They varied quite a bit. It was between 4 and 2,800 times greater than what's allowed in drinking water. So those are listed as secret, as essentially trade industry secrets. So they're part of Perimeter Solutions, who makes Miceck, part of their secret sauce, if you will.
So I know you've spoken with people who've raised concerns about the use of this fire retardant. What do they tell you? What are they concerned about?
I would say the biggest one, I spoke with called the Forest Service Employees for Environmental Ethics, and they're the ones that have been most prolific as far as filing lawsuits to prevent its use. And they say that it's a twofold thing. Number one, they say that it's actually not that effective. They say the use cases for when it can be used are somewhat limited. You can't really use Miceck when it's really windy. It just gets dispersed everywhere at that point. And you don't typically drop it directly on the fire. You're dropping it ahead of the fire. So it's not necessarily putting out the fire, it's just helping the fire not spread. And so they say the environmental impact is not worth the trade-off. And they say that because of the heavy metals in it have too much of an impact on its environment, it's not really worth that. One of the FSEE's lawsuits are what resulted in Miceck not being allowed to be dropped directly on water sources. So CAL FIRE has to maintain a perimeter, essentially, or a buffer zone away from water sources where they can drop it so that it's not inadvertently going into streams and things like that, because it does kill most life when it hits a stream or a lake or something like that.
Yeah, that was one of my questions, was the proven environmental impact of this fire retardant, if there is evidence that it's harmful to wildlife.
Yeah, from a life standpoint, for example, there was a 2014 study that showed that fish in the river, even if they did not die immediately when they came in contact with the remnants of Miceck or similar retardants, they still had it in their system days later and would, die after the fact. And then, another potential impact is because it is fertilizer, you'll have, after Miceck is dropped in, say, a water environment or even just kind of natural habitat, you'll have large algae blooms or extreme growth because you're just doing some super fertilizer on the environment, which seems good, but then can also have its own side effects.
What's the manufacturer of Miceck had to say about these concerns?
So Perimeter Solutions, who makes Miceck, they insist it's very environmentally safe. They call it the most environmentally friendly retardant ever used. They say they're always looking to make it safer. So, Miceck is a line of retardants. So there's kind of subtypes of it within there. And they describe that it is getting better. It's getting safer as far as the use of additives is reducing. And then also their main counterpoint to the environmental impact was really just saying that fires are destructive beyond just the fire. They have a significant environmental impact. When you have houses burning down, for example, there's a lot of chemicals that get released into the environment when a house burns down. So it's not just burned wood at that point. So their contention is that if they can prevent structures and other things from burning, then that's a net gain at that point. It's positive.
Have there been any talks in Sacramento or Washington, D.C. about doing any more research on the effects of Miceck or restricting its usage in any way? I'm sure the Forest Service employees for environmental ethics are probably not the only people to speak out against the use of this fire retardant.
Yeah, so there have been studies, but one of the concerns with them is that not all of the details are shared. So when it gets to the elements of, well, what are in the performance additives, that's kind of where the knowledge line stops on that. In fact, right now there is a push to use more fire retardant airdrops. President Trump signed an executive order encouraging its use and reducing regulatory barriers. So, he really wants more of that. And then there's something going through both the House and the Senate. It's called the Forest Protection and Wildlife Firefighter Safety Act of 2025. That's sponsored by a number of California politicians. And the ask there is to make it so that CAL FIRE or the Forest Service does not have to get a Clean Water Act permit in order to drop Miceck, that they could just drop it without, I guess you could say, considering the environmental impact,
Sure.
at least legally speaking.
Anything else you'd like to add, Greg?
What I really gathered from my reporting was that the two sides of it are very much, it's either purely good and we should be using more of it, but then other people said that it's purely awful and we should not be using it at all. In the middle was, the story was essentially that it's just one tool in the toolbox to help fight wildfires, that if people find it on their property, you can try to get it off with a hose. You don't want to use high pressure or anything like that to get off, but once it's on there, it can really cake on there. Finally, the USC study scientist that found the heavy metals in it, I asked him how safe it was. And, his idea was that, hey, if it's on your property and it's on your lawn, things like that, it's probably going to be fine. But if you have like a garden with tomatoes or something growing in it, you probably want to clear it out of there, do a test of your soil just to make sure it's okay, and then move along. So he didn't describe it as being end of world, but just be aware.
That was Greg Miceck, a reporter at our California newsroom partner, CapRadio in Sacramento. Thank you so much for your reporting.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
And that's today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KBPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. You can find the latest local news anytime at kbpr.org.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.